Hello, I'm Laura Cassidy from the American Chemical Society. Welcome to this news briefing from ACS Spring 2021. We're joined today by Dr. Francesca Curtin and Michaeli Wheeler from the Memorial University of Newfoundland. They're studying how to make cleaner, greener plastics from waste fish parts. Dr. Curtin?
Hi. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. And as the introduction said, we're interested in making plastics from fishery and aquaculture waste. How this came about is that where we live, as you can tell from the background of my shot, is very close to the ocean, and we have a large fishing and aquaculture industry, and in fact the aquaculture industry is growing year on year. So I started having conversations with the local Newfoundland Aquaculture Industry Association, and they said they were concerned about increased waste production with this expansion of aquaculture. So one of my colleagues in engineering at Memorial University, Kelly Horbolt, developed a way to separate the fish oil from the waste produced. So this is the guts, bones, skins, and so on. And this was a relatively simple process, but unfortunately the produced fish oil wasn't suitable for nutraceutical or nutritional supplement purposes. And so we were chatting, and I have an interest in kind of green polymers. And I thought, well, maybe we could make a plastic from this material, and maybe it would be degradable. So we looked at the literature and developed a 3-step method for making a plastic from the oil. And so you can see the fish oil has a yellow color on the screen. And in 3 steps, we produce a film-like material with an orange-red color. And it's slightly stretchy as shown in the video. So in the first step, we use hydrogen peroxide, and this is the same material that you can buy in a drugstore or pharmacy. And this oxidizes the fish oil. And then we react it with carbon dioxide, and then we react it with an amine. And an amine is a nitrogen-containing molecule. And we were looking at the different amines that could be used. And we thought, well, if we use a amine from a biological source, we could maybe make the process even more sustainable. So we started with an amine that can be obtained from cashew nut shell waste. And this is a commercially available material. And we got the red-orange plastic shown. And then this is where Michaeli, who's also on this press conference today, came into the project. She decided to screen some other amines, and her research focused on looking at the reactivity of amino acids. And amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. And several of these worked really well, including asparaginine. And her poster at the ACS meeting talks about her research. So next slide, please. In addition to looking at making the plastics, Michaeli also looked at whether, our hypothesis that these might be more degradable would hold true. And so our initial studies in this area, we used an electron microscope to look at the surface of the plastics under certain conditions. So we had the untreated polymer that's on the top left there, and you can see it's a relatively smooth surface. And if we put these plastics into water, they swell by about 10% mass or even volume. And we start to see holes appearing on the surface, as you can see in the bottom picture. And if we add an enzyme, a lipase, a biological catalyst to the water solution, we dramatically accelerate the degradation process, and we see both large and small cracks on the surface. And also we start to see microbes growing on the surface. So on the picture on the right, you can see some long thread-like structures, and these are the fungi that are growing on the surface. And you can also see smaller spherical, circular objects on the surface, and these are bacteria. So our hypothesis held true that the material does appear to be more degradable, and we're excited about the opportunities that are available in this area and for these materials. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Curtin. Very interesting. Are there any questions from viewers? Please state your name and affiliation in the chat window when you ask your question. While we wait for questions from viewers, I will start with a few of my own. So you mentioned fish oil supplements. Do fish oil supplements also come from the same fish waste that you're using? And if so, would this method compete with that market?
So my understanding for the fish oil supplements that they're processed in a very different way and in a kind of more high-tech setting, that things have to be kept very clean and hygienic. And so for a lot of locations around the world where there's a fishing industry, they don't have the funding to put in place the facilities that are needed to produce the fish oil supplements. And what we envisage happening here in particular is that we'll have centralized sites to process this fish waste. The problem with this is that the fish oil starts to degrade. So the oil is a fat, and so just like butter, if you leave butter out on the side, it starts to smell and go rancid. That's what happens with the fish oil. And if you want to use it as a supplement, you need to stop that happening. And that takes a lot of time, effort, and money. Whereas for the plastics that we're making, in fact, it might help in the process if they're already a little bit pre-oxidized, because our first step is oxidation.
Great. Okay. And how much fish is needed to make polyurethane?
So we were talking about this the other day, weren't we, Michaeli? How much plastic is produced from how much oil? And so if you had 1 gram of oil, you would produce about 1.3 to 1.4 grams of plastic. It really depends on the nature of the amine you're using. So the larger the size or the higher the mass of the amine, the less fish oil you need in the polyurethane. And the fish, when they're caught, it's between 40 and 60% of the mass of the fish goes to waste. So the fish head and the bone, the fish has put in a lot of energy to grow those parts, but it's not something that's sold as a food product in most areas of the world. And so it's really useful to do something with that material.
Definitely. And is there enough fish waste in the world to satisfy the demand for polyurethane?
So we did some calculations once when we were working on a proposal in this area. And based on United Nations figures for how much fish is both wild caught and through aquaculture around the world, and based on average amounts of waste from fisheries, there's plenty of this oil that could be accessed and used to make materials, whether it's these polyurethanes or not. And so we did the calculation, and the masses matched up really well with linseed oil and castor oil, which are oils obtained from non-food crops.
Good. All right. How do you actually extract the oil from the fish bones, skins, and remains?
Okay. Yeah, I can answer this one actually. So we don't actually do it ourselves, but our engineering collaborators do it. They take the fish waste and basically they put it in a giant fish or food processor pretty much, and just put it all, mix it together and make a giant mixture. And so when you get that mixture, you can take it and then you can centrifuge it. And just like your cooking oil floats on top of water, the fish oil floats on top of the rest of the mixture, and you can just separate it from there.
I see. Okay. And what type of fish will work for this process?
Basically, any fish that's what you would term in terms of dietary needs an oily fish. So we've used primarily salmon fish oil, but also we've used herring and capelin oil. And a student also, they bought some cod liver oil supplements and opened them up and used the cod liver oil as well. And all of them so far have been able to make the plastics. We just haven't had time to scale this up or look at their properties in a lot of detail yet, but we know the chemistry works.
How long does the fish oil-based polyurethane, excuse me, persist before degrading?
So in the presence of the enzyme, within a week, we start to see all these cracks and the growth of microbes on the surface. However, when it's in a dry environment, when we have the film, when we store that in the bench in small glass vials, we don't see any sign of degradation. When we put it into water, without the enzyme for about a week, it just kind of swells up, but we do still start to see bacteria and fungi growing on the surface if you leave it much longer than that in water. So these new polyurethanes, they wouldn't be suitable for use in very wet environments where they would swell up, because we kind of think that the holes that we showed on the microscope images, that's kind of how the fungi and bacteria are getting in there to start to digest the plastic.
Okay, and we have a question from a viewer. This is from Sarah from Urethane Technology International. She asks, what practical application do you think this type of polyurethane might have?
So thank you for the question. We're still in the process of fully characterizing the mechanical properties and other features of these plastics. When I was talking with a colleague, they were suggesting that the red color that came about through use of this cashew nut shell amine meant that maybe they would be good at, in applications where you needed a filter for different light tones and colors. We're quite interested to see if they even though they're not 100% compatible with moisture, we're interested in seeing if they could be used in any food packaging applications, or even in making wound dressings or coverings, but there's so much that would need to be studied if you want to go into those areas in terms of toxicology and safety. But yeah, no, I had a message from somebody in the run up to this who's interested in polyurethanes for absorbing oil from seawater, and so it'd be interesting to see if they could be used in that sort of area as well.
Definitely. So there are other biodegradable plastics made from corn and soy products. Is this one comparably degradable?
So as what we know of the related materials that are made from soybean oil, our materials show similar properties. So both in terms of degradation and potential applications, that would be where we would look. We found that while we were doing the degradation studies, we performed similar experiments with polylactide or polylactic acid, and also polycaprolactone, that are two degradable polyesters. And we found that this NIPU, this polyurethane material, was more degradable than the polylactide, but less degradable than the polycaprolactone.
And you mentioned some possible applications. Have you created anything out of the fish oil polyurethane for real world applications yet?
So not yet. So we generally make being chemists, we make things on a fairly small scale in our lab. We're doing very exploratory research. So the largest piece of polyurethane that we've made is probably a film of 2 or 3 centimeters square. And we haven't actually tried to use them in a specific application yet, but we'd be excited to share our technology with others out there who have great ideas for applications.
Okay. So how long would it take the plastic to degrade if it's just, left in air out on a table, for instance? I think you normally put it in water and add enzyme, but how would it degrade just, even out in the environment?
We haven't done those experiments yet, but I feel that it would degrade eventually over time, particularly if it was outside in a more weathered atmosphere, particularly in where we live, where there's a lot of rain and moisture in the climate. And so I would imagine that we'd start to see significant degradation within a few months, and maybe after a year it would disappear. But I would have to look in the literature to see what had been done with the soybean-based materials, and also to compare with the caprolactone and the polylactide, because we know it's much more degradable than the polylactide.
Okay. So it sounds like water greatly accelerates the process. Yeah. If you were to just use the plastic in your home without exposure to the elements, would it be expected to last, a lot longer?
I think it should last for a while, and I think there are ways that we could sort of demonstrate a lifetime of these materials in an everyday household setting through accelerated aging and that sort of thing. And of course, microbes, as living organisms, need water to reproduce and live. And so if we're preventing significant volumes of water, the material, I imagine, shouldn't degrade.
Okay. How does the chemical structure of this fish oil-based polyurethane vary from that of petroleum-based polyurethane?
So a lot of petroleum-based polyurethanes have lots of aromatic groups in the backbone, so benzene rings. And this gives them a certain amount of rigidity that our material just wouldn't have because of the nature of the building blocks used. And so I think compared to some polyurethanes, our materials will be less hard or tough, but at the same time more stretchable and able to be a little bit like a saran wrap or other films that are used for wrapping across a surface.
Okay. And as far as the chemical structure, what about it makes this polyurethane degrade faster than conventional polyurethane?
So the lipids, the fish oil that we're using as a building block, it contains esters. And for anybody interested in degradable polymers, the ester group is fantastic for encouraging biodegradation, because they're very easy to do a reaction called hydrolysis, which is a reaction with water. And so this starts to break apart carbon-oxygen and carbon-carbon bonds in the structure. And in our case, hopefully the material would break down back into something similar to the fish oil. So what we would call probably fatty acids and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and have you tested the breakdown of the new material to see which compounds are released?
So this was one of the challenges brought about by COVID. So we were at the stage of where we were going to start analyzing the solutions with one of my analytical chemistry colleagues, both for total dissolved organic content in the solutions, but also to identify what the degradation products were. So those experiments are still ongoing at the moment.
Okay. Michaela, I'll address this question to you. Are the mechanical properties of fish oil-based polyurethane the same as those of the petroleum-based plastic? And as far as applications, which kind of applications would overlap? You mentioned nothing in water, water applications would be bad, but are there others that are similar between the two?
Well, we haven't done any mechanical testing as of yet. That is still something we need to do. So I'm not really sure about that aspect. But as for the applications, I think another application that might overlap is we might be able to use it in clothing, because petroleum based polyurethanes are used in like weatherproof clothing. I know that there is some water involved in that might cause some issues, but it is a possibility.
Okay, very good. And related to that, what if someone has a fish allergy? Could they still use this type of polyurethane in clothing, for example?
I think Fran was saying to me earlier that part of the fish oil that causes the allergies is the proteins, I believe. Fran, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the polyurethanes are made from the lipid part of the fish oil. So the allergies might not be an issue, but it's something we need to definitely test in the future.
Okay, great. All right, and either of you can answer this question. What are the next steps for the research?
So yeah, we really want to identify with the biodegradation what we're producing, because we don't want to think that we're producing something that's not harmful to the environment and then it not be very good. So we do need to look in the forward direction there, but clearly we need to get those mechanical properties, because the mechanical properties of the polymer will determine what applications it can be used in. And we've had a few people get in touch since we published our initial work in this area, and they've been suggesting different areas where the materials could be useful. So we're looking forward to establishing some collaborations.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and do you have any kind of timeline for when this could possibly be commercialized, or is it still pretty far down the road?
So I work with part of our university. It's called the Marine Institute, and they've got a kind of bioprocessing lab there. And what they've been looking into with me and with the aquaculture industry is the viability to set up some of these processing centres. So sort of a bit like a blue biorefinery, where we could bring all the waste from numerous fish plants to one location and then process it into different fractions, including the fish oil. So they've been doing some economic analysis to figure out what's viable or not viable, and good locations for these. And so I'm hoping that these colleagues of mine at the Marine Institute can convince our provincial or state government to help build sort of a pilot plant. And so we'd be able to access more material and perhaps scale up the production of these plastics, so that then maybe we'd be able to give samples to different people for testing and use. So I think we're looking maybe with the funding situation, maybe 2 to 3 years to maybe have sort of pilot plants, and then if that's successful, maybe 5 years or so to actually have product on the market.
All right, we will keep an eye out for that.
Yeah.
So my final question, what take-home message about this research would you like to leave with viewers?
I think there's a lot of negativity out there surrounding plastics, and I just like to say that not all plastics are bad. They're really useful in many applications, and they can make our life better. But I think as scientists, it's good to take some responsibility and plan for the future. And we're just excited that something that we wrote down on paper a couple of years ago as an idea actually came to fruition. We were able to make these plastics, and they show really promising degradation properties.
All right, Michaela, is there anything else you'd like to say?
Fran pretty much summed it up. We are able to make a plastic fully biosourced, which makes it completely better for the environment. So it just comes full circle.
Very good. All right, thank you both. The archived version of this session will soon be posted at www.acs.org/ACS Spring 2021 conferences. Please join us for our next press conference tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern. Thank you.